Well, hello everyone. I'm really thankful to be with you both in this room as well as online. Last week, Eddie taught from the book of James that time is a gift from God, and no matter the amount of time we're given, it's good. And I think we should manage God's gift of time well, like when we eat. Have you ever tried eating a clock? It's rather time-consuming. And you know the best time of the day, don't you? 6:30 p.m., hands down. And you should I think we should try to manage time when we're working. I've learned that if you work at a clock shop, you'll have the time of your life. And in previous messages this summer, we've learned that managing time and how we spend it on entertainment. I recently learned there's going to be a brand new movie on clocks. It's about time. Today, I'd like to add a subject to time that inevitably there are moments in life when our time on earth just doesn't feel quite right. Maybe like ineffective puns. Things might feel a little off at times, or maybe when there's got to be something more. Have you ever felt that way? Consider the fictional story from Christian theologian C.S. Lewis. In his 3-volume space trilogy, Lewis explores the nature of human fallenness in the world. The hero is Elwin Ransom. He's a university professor who accidentally finds himself on a spaceship headed to Mars. And there he encounters spiritual creatures serving the maker of the universe. These ambassadors are assigned to preserve Mars from the influence of sin. After the professor explores Mars in Volume 1 and Venus in Volume 2, in the 3rd volume, he finds himself back home on his beautiful planet Earth. He is, however, confronted by the wretchedness of the planet. The good forces of the universe have decided that the evil of Earth must be extinguished before its corruption spill over into other parts of the universe. One evening, some of the spirit beings from deep heaven appeared in dazzling brightness in the professor's living quarters. They are like blinding pillars of light. They're powerful, but the important part lies here. They appear to the professor as not being exactly vertical columns. They seem to stand about 10 degrees off. They don't appear to be plumb to the earth. And the impression the professor has is that they must be off by 10 degrees. However, they are in fact connected and attached to true vertical. It's C.S. Lewis's way of describing the great creator. And in reality, the entire world is off 10 degrees. For the first time, the professor sees what true vertical is, and it makes the entire world seem irregular. From that point on, the prof knows the floor of the world isn't quite level, and the reality of that both unsettles him and brings him assurance. C.S. Lewis's story illustrates the central theme in Ecclesiastes. If you were to open your Bible up right in the middle, you'd probably get close to Ecclesiastes. It's a collection of teachings of King Solomon to God's people. He wants us to be honest about our mortality in a world that's 10 degrees off from its original design. In Ecclesiastes, we'll hear 2 voices of Solomon's logic. Sparingly, we'll hear the voice of his godly wisdom, while the dominant voice of the book is the earthy, fault-finder side of Solomon, which sounds a little bit like a smug, middle-aged critic, kind of like, want to live life well. In the grand scheme of the cosmos, life here and now is Hebel. It's a Hebrew term that metaphorically describes trying to grab smoke from a campfire in your hand and it just passes through your fingers. In English, we might understand the Hebrew word Hebel to describe life as meaningless, futile, at times absurd. Solomon has this recurring complaint in Ecclesiastes that life is meaningless, which sounds secular and defeatist on the surface, but as the book unfolds, we learn that Solomon is simply expressing the temptation we all feel to conclude that life's troubles drain it of its meaning. What Solomon is really saying is life does have meaning, but it's often obscured by life's disappointments. Life is confounding. It's confusing. It's uncontrollable. The helpful thing about the book of Ecclesiastes is that it addresses many of life's hard to resolve ambiguities. Solomon admits that living in this world is unsettling because so much about life is out of our control. But he ultimately reminds us that when we put all our faith in our Maker, we find ultimate assurance. Ecclesiastes helps us to navigate this fractured world by calling us to a healthy connection with true vertical, the great Creator. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon's going to lead us through a series of attempts he made to find meaning in life apart from God, all of which fall short in some way. His first attempt was to pursue knowledge in education. He says, I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything done under heaven. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun. Really, it is all meaningless. Like chasing the wind. Life is transitory, like seeing your exhaled breath on a chilly morning just kind of evaporate away. Solomon feels trapped by the confines of our fleeting days. Solomon's repeated catchphrase for this time-bound state of humanity is living life under the sun, which is his way to cast shade on the emptiness of the human experience in the world. Listen to his second attempt to find meaning as he tries to find it gaining wisdom and insight. I said to myself, look, I'm wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly, but I learned firsthand that pursuing all of this is like chasing the wind. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Solomon's expansive wisdom revealed his own limitations. And humanity originated in the state of paradise and innocence and immortality, but now it has fallen into mortality, guilt, and toil. Now, weakened under the constraints of time, poisoned by sin, everything under the sun seems pointless. What the heck? But Solomon doesn't throw the towel in. He's even more self-absorbed in his life under the sun. Listen to his third endeavor to discover meaning was to experiment with pleasure and accomplishment. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. Nothing was really worthwhile anywhere. I don't know, don't you love Solomon's transparency? I mean, we're able to look at life through his unique circumstances. And if we're honest, we've all wished we could gain anything we want, whenever we might want it. We've all been tempted to think that hyper-indulgence might make life more bearable. But Solomon is saving us the pain that living this way does not deliver true contentment. Wealth and pleasure and fame, it can eclipse our view of God. So Solomon offers some insight for all of us who are workaholics and success addicts. He even offers some advice for the guy who put a clock in the desk drawer of his office because he wanted to work overtime. Solomon asks, maybe you do too, what is the profit of human toil? Well, the recycled answer through Ecclesiastes is meaningless, like chasing the wind. Solomon knows us well. He knows every one of us is searching for significance. And when the final grain of sand falls through the neck of the hourglass of our life, none of us wants to be forgotten. Solomon questions if there's any real significance to one's legacy when the great equalizer is death, which happens to the rich and the poor, the wise and the foolish. The sting of death, it touches all alike, but not all live alike. As he looks in the rearview mirror of his own life, Solomon begins to identify the futility of his own past exploits. As he reflects on the labyrinth of dead ends he's pursued, possibly with some regret, Solomon begins to acknowledge the goodness of the Maker. And like many of us, Solomon eventually realized he had to look to God to make sense of the world and his existence in it. So I decided, he writes, that there's nothing better than to enjoy food and drink and to find satisfaction in work. Then I realized that these pleasures are from the hand of God. For who can eat or drink anything apart from him? God is the one who gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to those who please him. As Solomon concedes to the authority outside of himself, he actually begins to gain insight on living with an eternal perspective of his mortality. And he expresses his insight that he's gained in the form of a poem. It is the crown jewel of Ecclesiastes. The words of this poem have made it onto plaques and onto posters and greeting cards and even onto famous songs, like the 1965 hit by the Byrds, that season and times of earth just turn, turn, turn. Solomon's poem. It's headlined with this theme. For everything, there's a season, a time for every activity under heaven. And here's the poem. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And time will not allow me to explain every metaphoric allusion Solomon makes in this beautiful yet broken world, but highlighting a few themes here will help us understand Solomon's general thrust through this poem. Death. It's a foreign invader into God's good world, sparing no one of its sting. Expanding on that, Solomon's poem does not define what constitutes self-defense. He's just stating that killing is a horrible fact of living under the sun in this fractured world. War, regardless of one's personal feelings or socio-political conditions, Solomon is not defining what constitutes a just war. He's simply identifying that perfect love and perfect peace do not yet completely exist on earth where power and greed exist. And both sorrow and joy are part of life. Without one, the other is unrecognizable. There is a time to mourn and weep and lament. And there is a time to rejoice and dance and celebrate life. Both extremes are best shared with God. You know, one of my first recollections of Scripture being used in cinema was watching Kevin Bacon in Footloose. His character, Ren, is a feisty, envelope-pushing teenager who quotes Solomon's poem from Ecclesiastes 3. To argue for the freedom to hold a high school dance despite the town's ban on dancing. Ren argues that dancing is not something to be suppressed because that would go against the God-designed expression of celebration. I think Solomon would agree with that. And while we're discussing the silver screen, Ecclesiastes 3 frames up the entirety of Forrest Gump. In fact, a recurring voiceover recites the phrase, "To everything there is a season." Sadly, the emptiness Forrest feels when experiencing life detached from God is like floating as a feather under the sun. In The Greatest Showman, the emptiness of life is heard in Jenny Lind's song, which powerfully confesses how the pursuit of wealth and fame leads to emptiness. She sings these lyrics: "Towers of gold are still too little. These hands could hold the world, but it'll never be enough." And what's the core truth that all these films are driving home to us? Here it is. The quality of life largely depends on entrusting all our days to God's sovereign oversight and care. Since all of life is appropriate for its time, a good posture for us to make is to make intentional plans and then hold them loosely as we invite God to direct us. Now, after his poem, Solomon remains real with us. His frustration boils over in the form of a question as to whether humans can ever have enough certain knowledge of these times. He asks, what do people really get for all their hard work? Well, the assumed answer is nada, nothing. People gain nothing from all their hard work, and that's troubling to Solomon. How about you? He's also sobered by the problems of life in the here and now. Listen to how he phrases it. I've seen the burden God has placed on us all. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. As king of ancient Israel, Solomon has experienced the honorable weight of management and responsibility on his shoulders, and he has learned that God has made everything beautiful and everything appropriate for its time. If we can accept life as given by God, even the most burdensome parts can be bearable. How's that possible? Because God has planted eternity in the human heart. That's a great image. A picture of God planting indicates a seed, taking root, sprouting, growing, even producing fruit for a future harvest. With eternity planted in our hearts at conception, we can adult or grow up into seeing our life from God's angle. And when viewed through God's eternal lens, we'll also begin to see that everything of earth is presently 10 degrees off. And that fact whets our appetite for the day of complete wholeness with God. Although unnerved by his inability to discern God's plan, Solomon was drawn into a sense of mystery and awe of God. That's a good place to be. Solomon writes, so I concluded, there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. Although life is confusing and confounding, God gives good gifts to enjoy while living under the sun. I do want you to note, Solomon is not adopting the secular idea that we should milk it for all it's worth because you only go around once. He's not counseling anyone to sip from the sensual well of the world as a diversion from the harshness of reality. This scripture text does not give license to live foolishly and to frivolously dismiss eternity that's been planted in our heart. Solomon's lesson here is not nihilistic, hedonistic, or fatalistic. He does not resign to hopelessness as though caught in some pre-programmed loop. On the contrary, Solomon offers us a better viewpoint. Awe, alignment, and attachment with God brings significance to life. We cannot genuinely face our own mortality without first facing God's immortality and his infinite power. And Solomon begins to taste that exceptional truth. Let's listen and learn from what he writes. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. What is happening now has happened before, and what will happen in the future has happened before because God makes the same things happen over and over again. Solomon does not for a moment doubt God's control and sovereignty. He is rather in awe of the majesty and mystery of God. As contingent beings through and through, our only appropriate response is to fear him. Solomon concludes that the world God has made has its rhythms, has its seasons, and that's why alignment and attachment with our Maker opens our eyes to see life as his gift. And even though we live in a currently broken world in the face of unresolved problems, the best thing we can each do is rejoice in God and revere him for being so ever consistent and reliable. Here's the biblical truth. Life lived by purely human and earthly standards is empty, while life lived with God at the center is fulfilling. Life that's lived by pushing God to the margins is futile and chaotic at best, but alignment to the standard that is above the sun gives meaningful quality to life. I'm flipping Solomon's under the sun phrase right side up because God is not bound by sin-infected time under the sun. God therefore exists above the sun, above it all. And so pursuing God's perspective permits him to be at the center of every season of life we experience under the sun. I find meaning in my life story when I connect with God's overarching story. Many secular voices have discovered Ecclesiastes 3. Many leaders and lyricists, scriptwriters and social influencers, they stepped so very close to the star of the book, God, and yet missed him as the answer to life. The wisdom we need most to navigate life today is not a philosophy, but a person. That's what Paul wrote. In the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son. God came personally near with hope. While we lived under the influence of fallen principles of this world, at just the right time, Jesus left his pure and timeless heaven. Being found and full of God's glory, he surrendered his will and safety, and he penetrated time to become one of us. He clothed his eternal nature in skin for 3 decades, placing himself under the sun to fully identify with the human predicament. He gets us. And yet he lives sinlessly in order to redeem us, to ransom us. Our greatest time of need, in our greatest time of need, Jesus descended into greatness. Only by descending into our time and space could our Maker become accessible. And only then could God redeem the time of our life. He offered himself as our Savior, inviting us into God's realm of grace. And there, 3 truths about ourselves can be discovered. In God's grace, we begin to abandon all pretense of pride in oneself. All the accomplishments we could boast in to define us, that others esteem us by, will all fade away and will be forgotten in God's realm of grace. We can resist the appetite for our ego. And in his grace, we can learn how easy it is to abandon our pride in light of his pride for us. In God's grace, we begin to enjoy life as it is, a gift of God. We learn to live with open hands because we really only have control over the attitude of the present moment. His grace resets our priorities, and we begin to appreciate his simple gifts, like leaning forward into a good conversation around a fire pit, like feeling the warmth of an early sunrise on your face, like listening closely for the hum of the hummingbird as you watch it flutter around, and of course, enjoying a flavorful meal with friends you care about and who care about you. The simple things in life are good gifts from God. And there's a third truth we discover about ourselves. There, in God's realm of grace, we begin to revere and surrender to God. To refuse to do so is to deny one's dependency on God. Being in awe of him and his character, it's expressed in surrender. To revere and to surrender is to follow Christ in his path, which was one of descent, not ascent. Only in our self-emptying are we conformed back to the image and likeness of Jesus. Our quality of life on earth largely depends on bowing and surrendering the control of our life over to God. I'd like to draw upon the insight of David Benner. He's a Christian psychologist and spiritual director who wrote these words: "Only when we are willing to recognize that we do not control life can we truly offer our consent to the inflow of God's grace. Willingly opening our hands and releasing things we normally cling to is the most important way we can offer that consent to the inflow of God's grace." David Benner continues by suggesting 2 ways we can practice surrendering to God in the seasons of time of life. First, watch for the next unwelcome, life-altering event that enters your life and take notice of your initial response to it. Unwelcome events like a diagnosis, a form of rejection, property devalue, unemployment. The list is long, but pay attention to the emotions that quickly arise: aggravation, anger, fear, stress, impatience, disappointment. Stay with those feelings and reactions until they become clear, and then name them. Brenner suggests that we welcome them as you would visitors to a front door, and then gently release them in prayer to Jesus. Bid those emotions to unwelcome, life-altering events farewell as you surrender those responses to God's authority over them. And David Benner suggests another practice of surrendering to God. Identify something or someone you have lost in recent years and which you still miss. It could be a friend, a family member, a career, your health, your optimism, your beauty, the esteem of someone important to you, your own self-respect. Identify anything of loss or regret, and Benner suggests while there is nothing you can do to turn back the clock and recover what is no longer yours, you can release it. Let go of the attachment. Surrender it to Jesus. Doing so does no dishonor to the object of the loss. You may want to thank God for that person or that experience, but then release it to Jesus. Surrender. It's a way of saying, Jesus, I acknowledge that I do not need this for my happiness or my fulfillment any longer. It's a way of consenting to the flow of life and the inflow of God's grace that comes through it. Our quality of life, it largely depends on entrusting all our days and seasons of life to God's sovereign oversight and care. By the end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon found resolve to his critical frustration, and he teaches us this large point. Revering God is the best solution for the unsettled soul. It means you've grown satisfied redirecting your honor to him. And it means you're now at peace handing him your glory and fame over to him. It means you entrust God with your confounding questions of pain in life. Only in revering and surrendering to God will we find what Lewis describes as true vertical and discover true significance and value, true worth and esteem, and that I do matter to my Maker in this world after all.